Welcome back to Season 4 of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Join me, Brad, each week as my guests and I share incredible and powerful sobriety stories. We're here to show sobriety is possible, one story at a time. Let's go! For Tom, childhood was filled with positive memories. Nothing that hinted he'd ever struggle with alcohol. After college, he stepped into his career, a world where late nights out were normal, and alcohol made social connection feel easier. At first, everything seemed under control, but when the pandemic hit and isolation became a daily reality, drinking slowly picked up speed. Tom didn't have what many would call a rock bottom, but internally, he felt the truth. Something had to change. And this is Tom's story on the Sober Motivation Podcast. Grateful to have you back for yet again another episode heading into the holidays. The U.S. Thanksgiving is coming up, and then after that, you guys all know what we have. It can be called the Bermuda Triangle of sobriety. These holidays can trip up a lot of people. I want to mention too, we are off and running with the Just Between Us Sober Motivation Podcast, my brand new podcast, and it's literally just between us. I'll drop the link to get some more information down in the show notes below where you can get signed up, get it in your podcast player. More episodes are coming out, and I would love to have you there. This is going to be a very intimate space where there's going to be a lot more storytelling. For me personally, it's not going to be about bringing on guests and going through their entire story, although I know that's what we all love. But if you wanted to know a little bit more of the behind the scenes and how I got to where I'm at and the tools that I'm applying in my life today to stay sober and connecting with some cool friends along the way, I would love to have you check out the Sober Motivation Just Between Us podcast feed. You won't be able to find it by searching Apple or Spotify podcasts. It's a private podcast, and there's reasons for that, and I'll talk about that in the show with a new episode coming out soon. So hope to see a few of you there. Now let's get to this episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Today we've got Tom with us. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. Really excited to be with you here today.
Yes, I am excited to have you here today, a longtime listener of the show, which I always love connecting with people that listen to the show, and it's helped them out in one way or another. What were things like for you growing up?
Yeah, so I had a great childhood. I grew up in central New York, 2 loving parents. I have 3 younger sisters. And things were great growing up. I played sports. We did a lot of family activities, came from a relatively religious family. We go to church every Sunday and give thanks for what we have. And was really grateful for what my parents had given me. One of the greatest staples that I've gotten in my life was playing sports, but then also my parents were very adamant about me doing martial arts. So I actually did martial arts for 12 years of my life. And that really helped instill some fundamental skills and values into me, like respect, self-control, discipline, integrity, perseverance, and courage. So these things have carried through to today, and now I'm trying to instill that into to my little ones.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, martial arts. Does that work you up 12 years to a black belt, or how does that go?
A second degree, a bit rusty, but
Nice.
Yeah, I do technically have my second degree. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting story. I mean, you've listened to a lot of the episodes, and we kind of have maybe 2, 3, 4 different ways people grow up, right? I think sort of like maybe the stigma out there too is like, oh, people that struggle are going to struggle. It's rough from the beginning, and it's definitely not always the case at all. What does life feel like as you kind of go through those younger years in school and everything else that's kind of going on? A lot of memories there for you?
Yeah. Like I said, there was no, I guess you could say, cornerstone traumatic event that had pushed me in any particular direction, right? I was a very astute individual. I was always on the honors roll. I was in the top of my class, and I worked really diligently to be able to actually garner some college credits while I was in high school. So I went into college with 18 credits. I'm a big scientist myself. I studied biochemistry and finance, and I love the sciences. I still practice the sciences today. And so, yeah, I think it was mainly just me getting involved in certain things in college. Particularly, I was in a fraternity that normalized certain behavior, and I think that put me on a different trajectory. But it's interesting because it was almost like a a delayed onset, albeit I was in a fraternity when I was in college. I was still very busy. You can't be going out getting drunk all the time and passing your organic chemistry exams or double majoring while you're in college. So it wasn't really until when I got older and I actually had money to spend that things started to change for me.
Yeah, so you have that experience in college, but you're still doing everything you need to do, showing up, not experiencing. It doesn't sound like in any way any consequences or sort of any repercussions of drinking. It's just maybe overly normalized.
Yeah, I would say, I've done a lot of research on this topic since, I've made the profound change to become sober myself. And I think that one of the most frustrating things is that about 30 million Americans are living with alcohol use disorder, right? So that's 1 out of every 10 people is struggling with this disease, right? And it's not so much a problem of a few weak individuals. It's really just that culture normalizes the excess.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It definitely does for sure. How do things feel like for you after college? I mean, or is there anything else to kind of touch on for sort of your college experience there, or?
College was great. I really did enjoy myself, right? I was in a fraternity, had parties on the weekends, had a great time. And then I graduated and I worked at a pharmaceutical company as a research scientist. And then from there, I actually moved into the commercial side of things. So now I'm in business development and sales where I'm selling commercial tools, life science tools to researchers, and I'm supporting them. So I work with pharmaceutical companies, academic research centers, contract research organizations, and I moved up to Boston. And so after college, I moved to Boston, and I think that's where things really started to change, right? I myself am an all or nothing person, and that is just who I am, right? Yeah. And so when I'm interested in something, I dive right in, and that could be alcohol, that could be science, right? It could be sports, and I think that that's something that I've come to realize as I've taken a step back over the past 3 years to evaluate who am I, why am I doing the things that I am doing, and in moving to Boston. And in particular, moving into sales, I think that's really what it ignited something inside of me that turned me in a direction that I didn't like. And it took me a while to move away from that, right? I mean, this was 10 years later that I made this change after moving to Boston and participating in what I like to call the roller coaster, right? You go out on Thursday, it's Thirsty Thursday, you go out, you meet up with your buddies at the bar, and next thing you know, it's Sunday and you're just having a few drinks to feel normal while you're watching football. And you got the Sunday scaries setting in, and Monday comes around, you feel awful. You feel great by Thursday, but then that roller coaster is just going right back up again.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we tell ourselves too, like we're going to take it easy or we're going to do things differently. And then we often find ourselves right back in the spot where we, maybe made that commitment with ourselves or had that conversation or however it goes that we don't want to do it again. Interesting you bring that up too, all or nothing. And I would love if you have any more insight on that for yourself. I hear that a lot from people that struggle with this, right? It's either, even when people get sober, right? It might be like all in on the gym now or all in on the career now or all in here or there. And I think that's a very real thing. I mean, what do you see as sort of how that's developed over time in your life to get you to, maybe that spot? And the other interesting part too is that I think it serves us really well in some areas, right? Because I imagine you'll go back in school and all of that, you're doing so well, right? You're all in, you're just, going at it, getting really good results. But then it's sort of the flip side of it when the alcohol comes in, now you're all in here and it's like, okay, it's a slippery slope. Any insight to where or how that came about for your life?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brad. I would say that a lot of that probably stems from my early years where I did martial arts and I was very focused on refining and becoming somewhat of a perfectionist in a craft, right? And that also was instilled in my educational years too. I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the smartest. I wanted to be the top, right? I wanted to be able to hold that crown, if you will, in terms of, all the hard work and dedication that I put into things to pay off, I guess. Right. Mm-hmm. And as I had mentioned, when it came to alcohol, that also was the mentality that I had. I always wanted to be the guy that's buying shots and, buying rounds for everyone and, being that outgoing and fun guy to be with. Right. And it's interesting that you had mentioned, working out. And I would say that that has been a paramount part of my recovery process, is channeling that energy and that focus into exercise. And what I'm seeing is a huge trend now, which is the longevity medicine, right? And all these people that are looking at biohacking, right? I think that's something that I really try and embody now, is understanding your body is a machine, right? And alcohol is not the fuel that you want to put in it if you want to, live a long and fulfilling life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And that has come up a lot over the years in the podcast too, doing things perfectly, which can be tough, right? There's a lot of pressure in that area to make things right. I always wonder too, I mean, is that tied to self-esteem or value on the internal side of things?
I would say, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, the all or nothing too, because I think, people get into sobriety and like, I got to get rid of this. I got to get rid of it. And I mean, I think it's like everything in life is there's this balance, right? I mean, if you're just getting sober, going to the gym 6 times a day is probably a bit much, but I feel like it's still like that superpower that we can harness, if we use it appropriately, other than for like the stuff that's not helping us, in finding that balance. But also, I think trying to do everything perfect can be overwhelming, as well. I'm like the opposite of that. I'm like, the done is better than perfect. That's just my thing. Like, so many things that I do is so far from perfect. There could probably be some room for improvement, but yeah, I do hear that a lot with people too, about maybe the pressures of doing well and succeeding too can, maybe feel a little bit heavy. What were you like outside of the drinking? Because you said you're wanting to buy shots and really maybe be extroverted in a way and connect. How were you outside of that? I mean, was that your personality in all areas of life?
Yeah. What's really interesting, Brad, is I've always been an outgoing and extroverted individual, right? And I've always participated in consuming alcohol as part of fitting in, right? It's never been this substance that I needed to feel like I could talk to people or feel like I feel okay in myself. I've always been very confident in who I am. So I feel like I have a rather unique story in how I found myself with alcohol, because it was more of a substance addiction that I developed through chronic usage, more so than, wanting to lean into it for purposes of trying to like fit in or feel a part of something. I think the other thing too is I'm naturally just very competitive, right? And I think that also kind of plays into how, when I moved into sales in particular, you go to these sales meetings and it's free booze and free food, and you get a bunch of type A people all in the same room, and everyone's trying to one up each other. It's a very competitive environment. And I think that, I guess for a metaphor, was like gasoline on a fire, right? That really just kind of cranked things up a notch. Not to mention when where I lived in Boston, Southie, right? South Boston's, it's a very gentrified area, a lot of young, affluent individuals that are living there. And, I think that was also part of the status quo, is, going out, being part of the Joneses, if you will, right? Keeping up with the Joneses. I think I definitely fell into that pattern, and that just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that too. Is there any time in sort of your story earlier on that you had any awareness or clarity of like, maybe this is a problem, or maybe I'm doing a little bit too much, or did that kind of come later for you?
I would say that I definitely knew that something was off. I think that you can anecdotally take a step back and say, wow, I actually feel pretty good if I don't drink alcohol for a few days. But then I felt these societal pressures to partake and to continue to go out and be in that scene, right? And I think that's really the dangerous and slippery slope that a lot of people deal with, which is everyone else is doing it, so why can't I? And I think it's a dangerous place that a lot of people do find themselves in. And I would say that it was acceptable up until we got to the pandemic. And that is when things really changed for me, where I started to become more closed off. We couldn't see anybody, right? We couldn't travel. We couldn't be out in the world. And I think that I turned inward, and I found myself drinking more. And unfortunately, really affecting a lot of people. One of the few places that were still open were liquor stores, right? And so I don't think that I'm alone in that. During that dark time of the pandemic from 2020 through really like 2022, 23, a lot of people felt like alcohol gave them some comfort in knowing that they're not going to be able to see family. They're not going to be able to see friends, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a very extroverted, outgoing individual, and I thrive off of those kind of environments. And as much as Zoom or FaceTime is nice to have, it doesn't replace those in-person interactions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that it affected a lot of people. And it's interesting you bring that up because I feel like people here anyway in Ontario, they'd closed everything in Canada here. And people were kind of scratching their heads about why they were leaving. They sell beer at a beer store and they sell liquor at a LCBO. So it's like two of their own kind of stores. And people were scratching their heads on why is everything else closed down except for the stores. And I think what people came to realize, if they didn't already, some people who are open and willing to listen, is the withdrawal symptoms that people can have. I mean, alcohol is one of the drugs. You know, I feel like for a long time, we always said drugs and alcohol. You know, when I did the DARE program and everything, it was like drug. It was almost like two different categories of things, right? I mean, alcohol always kind of stood on its own. It felt like anyway. And you got to really, really watch out for the drugs. You know, that was like red flag, but this yellow flag, be cautious. But, you know, that was the way it was kind of explained. But then people kind of came to realize too, like wondering why these stores are the only ones left open. And that was the reality of it, because some people that were heavily addicted, I mean, you had to have it to keep going. I mean, you could go into withdrawal and die. And it's one of the only drugs. I mean, that and the benzodiazepines, Xanax, and all of that too are the two main ones that the withdrawal symptoms can be deadly. So yeah, that was a kind of an interesting thing. And then you're right. I mean, we have all of our routines and our connection and our communities and everything, and then it shuts down. And I mean, you're definitely not alone at all. I mean, if you listed off sort of the stats of people that struggle with substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder, and yeah, leaning in, man, it became a lot of people's best friend. You know, the interesting part about this is too, Tom, which I've kind of picked up, and I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying this is what I've noticed, is that period of time really sped things up for people. You know, so is it better or is it worse? I don't know. But I feel like a lot of people were able to come to the conclusion or have the awareness and clarity maybe a lot sooner than if this thing took a slow burn for the next 10, 20, 30 years, decades, because it can. And it kind of brought it to the forefront. I mean, was that kind of your experience or no?
I think you nailed it, Brad. I knew that what I was participating in was unsustainable, right? Mm-hmm. So I was in my later 20s and just about to turn 30 as 2020 approached, right? And I found the hangovers to get worse and worse. And, you know, you start to find these patterns that you get into where, once again, it's completely normalized. Like, hey, we went out, feel like garbage. Last night was a movie, right? You know, all these like discussions that people like to have.
Yeah.
But then it's like, oh, let's go to brunch. Let's get mimosas. Let's get bloodies. You know, we'll just kind of ease back into reality. And that's very common, right? I mean, it's actually idolized in Hollywood and the movies and these shows, right? And it's so from like a societal level, it's very much acceptable, or you know, on surface level, it seems acceptable. But then as the pandemic ensued, I found myself, it's completely fine to have a bottle of wine on a Tuesday night, right? It's not like somebody's going to smell my breath over Zoom the next day, right? And I think that a lot of individuals that I've listened to on your podcast too are in this category of functioning alcoholic, right? Where everything is fine in terms of like a mental capacity. They're able to produce, they're able to interact. Obviously, that can fall off the rails if you go a bit too far with it. But overall, you know, I found myself in that position of, yeah, I'm going to have a bottle of wine tonight, and yeah, I'll feel like garbage tomorrow, but I'll make it to like 4 or 5 p.m. and I'll have a few drinks and we'll be fine, right? And that's a miserable life, right? It's just, I found myself doing that, and well, in the moment, and I like to look at it being akin to a Band-Aid, right? That you put water on, like it's sure it helps cover the wound for the moment and you feel okay, but eventually it's going to get soggy, it's going to fall off, and it's just going to be, the wound's still there, right? And so you can't pretend like it's gone.
Yeah. And that's a good way. Good way to put it there too. It's like a a Band-Aid. That's kind of like the question that I might pitch to people sometimes, if not now, when?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think that we want to believe that things are going to get back to maybe how they once were, or we're going to be able to figure this out, or we're not going to have the consequences of maybe the emotional pain or the hangovers or everything like that. But I think the reality is, for most people, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but I think for most people, like, it's just progressive. And the longer you keep it around, the more you open yourselves up. I mean, I hear so many stories of people, they're kind of cruising along. Like, it sounds a lot like you were. There's no, life is not falling apart, but the longer we stick around, I feel like there's just so much unpredictability. When I go to events and stuff, concerts and everything, I feel like I'm always on the lookout for the unpredictability of people drinking, right? And in how they change. And if I was no different. It was the same for me. It was unpredictable. I didn't know when I would take it too far, when things would, go sideways. Most of the time they were okay. I didn't feel good in the morning, and I wasn't really happy with how I was showing up. What about on the inside? Because I think that that's where a lot of people who kind of quote unquote are functioning and things are going well, which can be a very confusing place to be, right? Because we see the movies and we see the stories on intervention and we see all of this, and it's like, oh man, I'm so far from there. Like, I'm good to go. What about on the inside? How were you feeling about how things were going for you?
Yeah, I had tremendous guilt. Like, I knew in the back of my mind that what I was doing was destructive, right? I studied biochemistry. Like, I understand the whole process of ethanol to acetaldehyde to acetate, right? It's this, yeah. And it's worth noting too, now I work in the field of oncology and genetics. And so I think it's somewhat fascinating and somewhat astonishing that in the world that we live in today, that this class 1 carcinogen is still promoted the way it is, right? Mm. It's well understood, it's well documented that this substance is really harmful, especially when consumed in excess. And I think that there are some societal and economic underpinnings that keep it where it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's, one of the other things that I wanted to get across to the audience here today is that you're not alone, right? If you're struggling with this, it's by design. And so I hope that your viewers and the listeners out there can understand that if you feel like you are looking to make a change, I implore you to reach out to those around you for support. Because it's very difficult to do on your own. I couldn't have done it by myself, right? Without my family, without therapy. I went through cognitive behavioral therapy to really get to the root cause of why am I doing what I'm doing. I went through that process of, oh yeah, I'll just have light beer. Famous last words, dude. Like, famous last words. Yeah. Because 1 turns into 2, 2 turns into 4, 4 turns into 8. It's just you. Yeah. You will always go back to this pattern of alcohol. And unfortunately, that's just how a lot of us are hardwired, right?
Yeah. And so much more is coming to the surface now, which it is so interesting. You bring that up, just the marketing and the promotion, and you see the billboards and the commercials and everybody's having a good time and everything like that. And it's just so far from the truth for the vast majority of people. When do you, because you're right in there with this stuff, man, when do you see the shift in us, as in like the world getting the truth about the impacts of alcohol? I feel like for the longest time, I mean, I didn't have any idea. None of this stuff was kind of on my radar for a long time. What did you see kind of out there in your world when we started to really get the truth? Or has it always been there? We just weren't looking for it. It just wasn't in front of us.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I always think back to when I was in a research lab, right? And I would be underneath a fume hood and I would be working with cultured cells and I'd be running experiments. And it always struck me as strange that the one thing that I would use as a potent disinfectant when I was in a fume hood, because you need to have sterility when you're in these fume hoods, is 100% ethanol, which is basically what you're consuming. Fundamentally, vodka is just 40%, not 100%. So there's just 60% water that's added to it. Mm. And that always stuck in the back of my mind, like, wow, I'm spraying this to kill anything and everything that is inside this fume hood. And then we are voluntarily consuming it to elicit this effect that is somewhat of a side effect of the substance itself. I think that from like the societal and marketing perspective, we've had alcohol for thousands of years, right? Early on with mead and wine and beer. And it was actually considered quite valuable back when the potability of water was actually quite concerning, right? Water oftentimes made you very sick. There was dysentery or listeria. There was these horrid diseases, and beer or wine would not carry these deadly pathogens because they couldn't thrive in that environment, right? And so getting back to your question around the societal or marketing side of things, I don't know. I truly think that there is forces at power that don't want this truth to bubble to the top because it's underpinning a lot of things in our economy, right? I mean, think about that industry itself, which is big alcohol. There is a lot of money that's in there. And to think about all the restaurants or bars that are kind of, this spidered network that falls underneath all of that, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars in revenue that could be perturbed, right? I think tangentially to that, right? Because a lot of this, when I think about it from a biochemical standpoint, is these industries are thriving off our dopaminergic pathway, right? Which is dopamine. And I'm sure that, you've heard of this before, and a lot of others have talked about this in this space. And we're seeing a similar trend happening now with sports gambling, right? These companies are getting away with these applications where somebody used to have to go to a casino to place a bet and to be able to, gamble. But now somebody can do that on their couch. Somebody can do an 8-leg parlay on their couch while drinking a beer. And it's completely fine. And it's completely fine because the government has basically told you in small, very, very small font at the bottom of an advertising that please gamble responsibly, or please drink responsibly, right? And so it's got the stamp of approval. Just because someone said that you can do it doesn't mean that it's good for you, right? And I think that's something that I've come to find out since taking a step back and really evaluating, what am I doing, right? What am I doing to myself? What do I want in life? And it wasn't really until, my wife and I were getting ready to welcome my daughter into this world that I really needed to take that step back and understand, like, what do I want for my family? What do I want for my future? Do I want to stay on this roller coaster, or do I want to be able to be available, be present, and be who I want to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And connecting those dots, I think, is part of the journey for a lot of people. Alcohol is holding us back. And I think it's easy for us to say, and I think maybe we all go through it in our own way, right? It's got to be this, or if I do that, like just to try to make things work to keep it around, kind of some people share, like, make excuses, for the alcohol, right? Maybe it's this, maybe, everybody's different, but maybe it's the job, maybe it's the relationship, maybe it's these friends, maybe it's this. And it takes some time. I mean, you shared kind of that 10-year mark, and a lot of people share that. I don't know what it is about, like, sort of that decade mark of like, hey, I kind of am having thoughts of my life could be better without this. This might be causing some friction, or this is causing some friction. And then, like, that decade mark of like, okay, it's time to make the jump. And then you share about how it's impacting you internally. And that's kind of the thing that I think can keep us hidden for a bit, right? If you break your arm, then everybody says, oh, yeah, you broke your arm. Do you need help with stuff? Everybody's there to help you out. With this thing, I mean, with the guilt and the shame involved and us struggling internally, people might not pick up on it. It's almost kind of like there's two sides to this I look at, right? There's your story here where it's this internal tug of war, right? I know if I wasn't doing this, I would be in a better spot, or could potentially have that. And then there's the other side where it's completely obvious to everybody that, Brad's got a problem with alcohol. And they're both very difficult to get out of, I mean, if you're towards the end of the spectrum and the elevator's completely in the basement, it's like, okay, you're kind of starting maybe from scratch in some ways. But the other side of things is that being honest with ourselves that, hey, I might not be having all of this stuff happening around me, but I still know something is going on. And the other side of that too, that always kind of blows me away, is that some people have awareness that this is impacting their life and some people don't. And that's a really interesting thing to me as well. So you mentioned your wife too. Did anybody around you ever say anything that, hey, is this something to have a look at, or was this kind of came from within?
It was combinatorial, right? I think it was both something from within me, and my wife, when she got pregnant and my drinking partner stopped drinking, it became blatantly obvious what was going on, right? The normalization and just we're going to have some drinks frequently, right? And then when that stopped, it became the data was able to be normalized. So it's like you're not partaking, but I still am, and I think that's really when things started to accelerate rapidly in terms of I have a problem. It used to be we are doing this together, everything is fine. Family events, social events, everything is okay. Sure, I'm definitely drinking in excess, but so was everyone else, right? Or so I thought. That's the other component too, right? Is a lot of times you delude yourself into thinking like, oh yeah, that guy also had 5 beers. Like whatever, I had 5 beers. Irrespective of that, 5 beers in one occasion is also not healthy in general, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really until my wife got pregnant and we were about 3 months away from welcoming my little girl into this world, where my wife did have to have that conversation with me, like you can't do this anymore. This is unacceptable. And I knew at that time, at that moment, which is going to be three years in about 3 weeks from right now, I could not bear the thought of being that person in front of my daughter, right? Like I just couldn't think of it. And I'm proud to be with you here today and say that I have never been drunk or hungover in front of my daughter, and I never will be. And that's something that I take great pride in.
Yeah, that's incredible. And two, those conversations I think are difficult, maybe in some sense for the people around us, right? But what I've constantly heard too, if anybody out there is listening is kind of in that spot, how do you approach somebody who you see as struggling that you want to try to support them? But I find a lot of people feel some relief in that. It's kind of like an off ramp. It's like, okay, you know what? Like this is maybe my opportunity to not only gather support, but to bring it to the light, not sort of the dishonesty or kind of the delusion of it's just like everybody else. And I think we naturally, it's kind of like the red car effect, right? Like if you buy a new red Honda Civic, well, guess what? Like everybody owns a red Honda Civic, but before you bought the red Honda Civic, you never noticed one of them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that can be when we're drinking, we just seem to notice everybody else who's drinking a little bit too much we don't know the rest of their life and the rest of their story, but it's like, okay, you know what? See, it's not that bad, but we don't necessarily pay attention to the people who don't drink or the people who only have half a drink. That stuff doesn't make all that sense to us, but it's like we kind of focus on maybe what's going to reinforce where we're at, in sort of this subconscious, strange kind of thing. And so your wife comes to you and mentions, and you've got like this, this life-changing event too, your daughter being born. I mean, how do you go from there? Is it then like, does she come to you and mention, hey, you got to make these changes and I'm here to help you? Is it the next day that you get started on things?
It is. Yeah. Everyone has their own rock bottom, I guess you could say, right? And it's all about perspective too, right? Somebody's rock bottom might be a simple conversation. Somebody else's rock bottom might be going and dealing with law enforcement and having to, deal with that, right? So and that's why it's important to note too, I don't like using the term alcoholism because there's a lot of stigma that's associated with that. I think referring to it as alcohol use disorder is really helpful because even somebody that might have just a few drinks a week, you don't know what they're dealing with. They might be dealing with some demons inside their own head. Everyone's biochemistry is different, right? And so that's the way I typically view it. But for me, it was really a conversation and having that discussion with my wife and basically realizing that my normal drinking behaviors are just unsustainable and I cannot keep doing this, right? And I'll be completely frank and honest. If there are people out there that are struggling with this and think that I just stopped and I've just been this, perfect individual since I've stopped, I'd be lying, right? There are, I think, 6 occasions that I have slipped up, right? And slip, I like to use it as an acronym, which is sobriety lost its priority, right? But each time that I have slipped, I did not take this mindset of the shot clock starts over, right? Like, I think that that's a very dangerous way to go about it. And I think that's how a lot of people start to spiral, because if you look at it as like, well, back to day zero, right? This is that can be very mentally defeating, right? If that was the case, I wouldn't be able to say that I'm going to be 3 years, but when you look at it and it's really just 6 times over a period of over 1,000 days, that's nothing, right? That's like a percentage of a fraction. And so that's the way I like to view things, because likely you will slip up, right? I think that most people, it's part of that recovery process. I don't know many people that haven't slipped up in the process. You are swimming against the current, right? As we had talked about these societal norms that we're up against. Another big thing that I come to find out is, believe it or not, like, some of your friend group is going to change, right? Some of the people that you thought were friends turn into, oh, well, that was really just a drinking acquaintance, right? And you kind of go through this transformation of, who are my true friends, right? And I know who my true friends are because they've stuck with me, because alcohol was just a thing that was there. It wasn't the core competency of our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think such a beautiful way to look at it too, because you're right. We can get stuck. And I mean, I think those of us that struggle with this kind of tend to have maybe that internal, I call it like roughing ourselves up, right? That negative self-talk of like, here we are again, you failed again. But if you look at it sort of from a different perspective, the only person who can have a slip or have a lapse or have a relapse is somebody who's actively trying to get sober. And that in itself is massive, as opposed to the way life used to be. So progress is already there. You know, when I first started this whole journey, it was kind of like this hierarchy in an interesting way of like, your continuous days of sobriety was like your badge of honor. You kind of sat at the top, and you were the most looked up to, and all of that. And, you know, if that's the way people want to go about it, I'm not saying what's right or what's wrong, but I also can see somebody that's maybe 30 days that's really been grinding hard, going to therapy, you know, maybe support meetings and doing a lot of work, maybe make that emotional or that internal progress. And there's some people maybe that just decided not to drink, and 10 years later, maybe not a whole lot has changed except for not drinking. And I think when we get into this, we realize that what we're going through, this whole thing, there is an element of the drinking that is sort of the quote unquote problem, but there's also other things at play too that we really go to work on, you know, that therapy helps so good with. And that's it. You're not starting from scratch. It's kind of like, I look at it too, like if you do grade 9 and you fail the final exam, it doesn't exempt you from what you've learned throughout all of grade 9. It doesn't say, okay, well, you learned nothing, but you pick things up, you learn from it. And I think statistical wise, I don't know them or have them in front of me, and I think finding something that would be extremely accurate would be difficult. But I think a lot of people are going to go through committing to not drinking and find themselves having to drink again, and how that looks is going to be different for everybody. But the most important part is, how do I get back up and keep going with things other than roughing myself up and like you mentioned too, spiraling out of control. Plugging into therapy, share a little bit with us how that was helpful for you. And I'm also curious, before I forget, how did other people take this, right? Because your drinking might not have been out there right in everybody's face. How do they take it when you say, hey, you know what, this is what I was struggling with. This is the journey I'm on.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was probably the most difficult part. I would say that for me, and what I've come to find out in my journey here, because it's just a continual process, right? Mm-hmm. Is that alcohol, I think at its core is a disease of somebody's ego. And I think that that's really what I've come to find out, is that I, in the beginning, was extremely jaded. I was like, why can't I do this? This is not fair. Everyone else gets to do this. And as I've had time to really just go through this process and make some mistakes, and take a step back and once again reevaluate, like, what am I doing? I've come to find that you will eventually arrive to the conclusion that people are there for you, right? And people want to support you because they love you and they want to see you be successful. And with where I was going with things, it was a path of destruction. And so those that really loved me and cared for me were extremely supportive, and they wanted to see how they could help, right? Those that just wanted to drink with me stopped texting me. They stopped calling me, right? And they kind of went off to the wayside. And I think that it can also just be recognized as a normal part of life. You have a lot of friends when you're younger, and then just each year you just have this factor of attrition that happens where these people just turned into more of acquaintances. So I think that, the alcohol component in terms of accelerating some of that, perhaps maybe some of it was more of a facade that was established through alcohol. But I also would like to mention that as a guy, going to therapy is difficult, right? There is, once again, the stigma of like, oh, you're not strong, you need to go talk to a shrink, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I also just have the humility to say, hey, you know what? Like, sure, I can talk to my wife, but I think it could also be super helpful if I talk to an agnostic third party, somebody that just like doesn't know me. They don't have any stake in the game.
Yeah.
They're just somebody to just bounce ideas off of. And I would highly encourage those that are evaluating sobriety to evaluate, in particular, cognitive behavioral therapy. I think for myself, somebody that's an all or nothing, somebody that experiences ADHD, it's been tremendously helpful for me to be able to talk to somebody and understand and deconstruct, who am I? Like, why am I ticking the way I am? There is a lot to be said about that. And then to just also get things off your chest. I think a lot of people drink because they have just so much going on. Brad, the world we live in is insane, man.
Yeah,
You have all these apps on your phone and notifications, and we live in this capitalistic environment where everyone's trying to upsell you to the next thing. And I think that can push people in certain directions. And, alcohol is definitely one of those directions. And I think the ability to just have that release valve, similar to working out, right? Like, this is another release valve for me, is to be able to talk to somebody and understand, like I had mentioned, why am I ticking the way I'm ticking? How can I better understand how I am constructed so that I can better get in front of things when I see certain patterns come up and make better choices than the deleterious ones that I was making prior?
Yeah. So plugging into, I mean, there is that underlying sort of stigma of plugging in and getting help. I had one guy explain it to me so good about therapy too, because I think it's often thought about, you wait until everything hits the fan and then you plug into therapy. But he had mentioned he does therapy as more of a preventative thing. Of he stays plugged in so that things don't spiral and he can get that support. And I love how you put it there too. Somebody without that emotional investment in the relationship that can have that different viewpoint, obviously drawing on experience and education and everything else too, to help us, develop new tools on how we're going to go about this too. You mentioned there too, like the ADHD part. Do you ever have any discussion or feel like that played into how things went, or is that kind of on its own?
I definitely think it plays into it, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that it's part of how it plays into me being all or nothing, right? I think that hyperactivity and just extreme focus, it can be harnessed for good or it could be harnessed for bad.
Yeah.
And I've seen both sides of the coin. And so, I would definitely say that for those that do have ADHD, which is there's a lot of people that do, I think that a lot of people tend to lean into alcohol because there's just so much noise, there's so much chatter going on in your brain. And a lot of times alcohol can just dull that, right? And it can just kind of bring you down to just not have to listen to all of these various components of the day-to-day and the stress, right? It helps you just kind of relax a bit. But as I mentioned earlier, it's purely temporary, right? And oftentimes what I found myself is I thought I had severe anxiety and all of these, mental conditions. And then after I stopped drinking, within a few months, I was like, wow, this is pretty great. Like, sure, I don't exhibit these insane highs and getting this dopamine rush from drinking, right? And that's really what it is. But I think John Mayer actually has a famous quote in terms of his decision to stop drinking, in terms of, you may not exhibit the high highs anymore, but eventually the floor raises and you start to feel normal. And so you're just kind of even, and you're not feeling those low lows, because that's really the difficult part, right? Is what goes up must come back down. And that's where a lot of us find ourselves. Is, sure, you can have a great time on that night out, but then the next morning you're looking at your phone and you're like, what did I do? This is awful. And you're super jittery, which is a biochemical component of having a depressant and then rebounding hard off of that, right?
Yeah. Wow, man. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. And that is, I find people that really are starting out on the journey, that is one of the most difficult challenges that they have, is that we're so used to I kind of refer to it as the chaos of like the up and down, the roller coaster. And it can feel a little bit bored or a little bit blah, like I'm not experiencing that. And then it's finding other things that we're going to do. It's finding other things that we're going to do in the evenings, or when we're just kind of used to plugging into that routine. What else are we going to do? And a lot of people, when they kind of get to the spot, I think, of quitting, it's like, who am I now? What do I like to do? What are my hobbies? What are my interests? And there might not be much going on there. We might have kind of disconnected from what we used to enjoy. So it's kind of re-exploring that, and who am I without this, and who am I without drinking and going out, and maybe, like you mentioned there too, changing up friends, and how that stuff shifts. It's such an interesting thing how that starts to shift, right? I look back and I'm like, man, me and some of my buddies, we were great of pals, but we had nothing in common other than drinking. But we did that really well, but there just really wasn't much more to it. And even as I tried, because it's kind of like that lonely chapter, even though I tried to keep those things alive, it just never would. And then you enter that kind of lonely chapter where you're not really who you are yet. Like the new build is not there. You don't connect with the old friends. You haven't found your new ones. And it's like, okay, here I am in the middle, but that's all part of the process. Thank you so much, Tom. Great work with everything. Really appreciate you reaching out and sharing your story with all of us here on the show. Any thoughts for closing for anybody out there who might still be wrestling with this?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Brad. As I mentioned, longtime listener. I think that your podcast has truly helped me, and at a minimum, I hope that my story here can help some of those that are struggling. Right? Don't give up. It's an enduring process, and we're all struggling. Right? Being a human is not easy. And, there are a lot of forces that are at play to make you act in a certain way. At your core, you know who you are, right? And what you should do, what's going to be best for you. And if you need help, I encourage you to reach out for help. There are people that are out there that are willing to help. And so, yeah, I encourage anybody that's looking for help to reach out for help.
Yeah. And that's so true. There's so many people that are willing to help. I think it's that hurdle of, let's just let them know where we're at with things. We keep it so guarded and so secretive when we don't share. And it's really hard to get the help and support that we need with all of the secrets that we keep. So it's kind of like opening that door slowly. It doesn't have to be kicking it off the hinges the first go at it, but just letting people in a little bit to what's going on. And I think that over time we'll realize that, hey, we're not alone. And everybody, like you said, they're struggling with something. And even on the journey, even in not drinking life, like there's still a lot of struggles. Family and career and relationships and all that stuff is continuously, we have to work through everything. With the holidays coming up too, it can be really difficult. So stay plugged in and reach out for help. Well, thanks again, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Brett.
Well, there it is, another incredible episode here on the podcast. Huge shout out to Tom. Thank you so much. As you guys know by now, I love having people on the podcast that are listeners of the podcast that have gotten something out of it. It's so cool. Full circle moments for sure. Tom wants to stay anonymous in this whole thing, so I will not be dropping his Instagram channel below. If you have anything you want to share with Tom, send it to me. I could definitely get it over to him via email. But hopefully there's a few things in there you guys could connect with. I think it's a very relatable story. It's interesting in the pandemic there. A lot of people on the show anyway, things really sped up for them there. And even though it was difficult, I think a lot of them look back and are maybe grateful, in one sense or another, other than maybe it carrying on for a lot longer and kind of being a problem instead of being right there in front of your face. So interesting experience. Thank you as always for listening. Don't forget to drop a review on Apple or Spotify, and I'll see you on the next one.